Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to go over what is a DEX, what is liquidity, what is volume, and how can I use a liquidity pool to make money, right? And the reason I'm going over this is basically also how to use Uniswap, which is a DEX. Uniswap is a DEX. And when you hear me talk about a token that you don't understand, one of the very first things you need to do is look up and see if it is an ERC20 or if it is something running on Ethereum, and if you can get it at a DEX. And I often say, oh, you can get it at Uniswap, etc. Well, I'm going to explain to you the basics of all this stuff so that you'll understand. So what is a DEX? A DEX is a decentralized exchange. It's basically a bunch of computers agreeing on a record. And that's what Ethereum is, okay? That's what cryptocurrencies are. That's what Bitcoin is. That's what all these cryptocurrencies are, is a bunch of computers that agree on a record. If one of them wants to do something different, all the other computers have to agree to the change. So it's a democratic process. If one of the computers wants to change the number of Bitcoin, all the other computers have to agree, in which case they wouldn't, because everybody knows the rules with Bitcoin and they all want it to be consistent. So it's a very democratic thing. So now you can consider this record, you can consider this whole entire entity, a blockchain, you can consider it as just a computer, as one computer. And it is a trust computer. So blockchains are nothing more than a computer. They're just a trust computer, a computer you can trust that is not controlled by one entity. It's controlled by a democratic process. That's what it is. Blockchain is just a democratically controlled trust environment, okay? And Uniswap and DEXs are built on top of it. So, here's a slight tangent. You'll hear me talk in some of my videos about how blockchain is the foundational layer, and it's going to be worth more than the things built on it. You cannot have something that's extremely valuable built on a foundation that's too small. The foundation has to be worth more than the thing that's built on top of it. And the reason that is because then if this big honeypot creates a huge incentive to corrupt this system in order to steal this value. That's why cryptocurrencies will be worth in excess of $400 trillion, because the world's wealth is going to be built on top of a foundational layer, blockchains, right? The blockchains will be the foundational layer of securities, of banks, of every single financial asset you can think of. Cryptocurrencies will be the bottom layer. And so we know $400 trillion is coming into crypto. And that's why it's going to be a massive, massive transition of wealth. But that is a slight tangent. So DEXs are a decentralized exchange. Uniswap is a decentralized exchange. These are built on top of this trust computer. As opposed to a CEX, which is a centralized exchange, a centralized exchange just runs on one computer. You need permission to use it. One entity controls it. One corporation, one entity. Coinbase, Kraken, KuCoin, Binance, those are all centralized exchanges. They require permission. They say, oh, you need to ask us for permission. Oh, and if we want to run off with your stuff, we can do it. A centralized exchange is not a democratically run entity or trust computer. So you're entrusting one entity in control of your funds. So now we're going to get into how how Uniswap specifically works. Because I get asked the question, how does it work without an order book? You place an order here and you get some token here, right? And you swap them without an order book. Well, we're about to explain. All of this is based on math. That's it. And we're going to place this curve where at 1 and 1, we get one token. So if I put 1 here, I get one token out. 1 here, one token out, right? This is where the curve starts. The curve really starts wherever someone who seeds this initially, they provide liquidity. Whoever first creates the liquidity creates the ratio. But we're going to say that we start with 1 to 1, right? So this curve is one times what the token 1 times token 2 equals 1, right? So that when you have 1 of token Y and 1 of token X, you'll get 1 of token X, right? So if you add this, it has to subtract this in order to maintain this ratio. And basically this 1 is a constant. It's just a number. It's just a number. Like, that's all it is. And so let's say you want to buy, you want to you're adding one token, right, to this thing. So you're putting in one order. How much of this one are you getting out? Well, you're going to get half. You're going to get 0.5 because you're going to get 2. 2 will be the supply, right? So you have 1. You put in an order for 1, right? So see, the interesting thing is you can do all the math yourself if you know how this equation, right? And there's a lot more math here, but I tried to make this thing as low math as possible so that you guys wouldn't get too, so I wouldn't go too much into math. But if you put an order for 1, when starting for 1 you can guess what the price is going to be. And you're going to shift the price 50%. Like you see the, at the bottom of this, when you put in an order on Uniswap, you'll see a shifting number, like how much you slippage. So if you put in an order for 1, and you on this particular relationship where there is 1 and 1 supply, right? You put in 1, so you double the amount of tokens, right? You're going to get 0.5, leaving 0.5. So you're going to have 2 inside of the contract times 0.5 equals 1. So it maintains that. That constant. So that's how all this works. It's just math. It's a curve. It's just a curve, mathematically speaking. And we're going to go over some examples so you can really get a clear idea of this. So what is liquidity? Liquidity is how much money exists inside of a pool, right? These token pairs are a pool. Like someone comes in, so initially someone comes in and sets the price, and so let's say this was just created, right? So someone added 1,000 of token Y and 100 of token X, and now it's a pool of tokens. And you establish some constant relationship between these two. So if you buy more of these or you supply more of these, in other words, if you're swapping these for these, right, you're taking these out and you're adding these to it, right? You're adding this and you're subtracting this. And so this would go up and this would go down. And there's actually a point where they would meet, But, and all of this can be figured out with math. So liquidity is just how much money, in respective to, it's just how much money is in the pool. And volume is how much trading action. It's just the amount of action that happens. Like you traded 1,000 tokens in a day. That's all volume is. Is like how much people will trade stuff. Okay, so let's say we have this liquidity pool, right? And we want to place an order. And right now, the price is 1 to 10, okay? Because that's the ratio, right? That's the ratio we're at. So what will the price be? We want to know what the price will be, right? We're not going to do a lot of math here. I'm trying to make this super simple, okay? So you put 100 of token X. How many token Y will you get? Because you see, look, wow, man, you're going to double that supply of token X. So you're going to move, one thing's going to happen. You're going to move that. You're going to move the price because you're coming in with a pretty big order in respect to the amount of liquidity that's in here, right? So we know that these are based on a constant, some constant. And we're going to say, okay, well, we know we have 100 and 1,000, and we want it to be a constant, so we put in 1 right here. And we know that doesn't make any sense. So we have to multiply our liquidity by something, because we have 100 of token X, so 1,000 of token Y, and it doesn't equal 1, so we need to multiply it by something in order to get a constant. So we figure out that Q equals 100,000, right? And the order that we want to place is, we want to place an order for 200, we want to put an order for 100 X, right? So we know that the new supply for X is going to be 200. And we also know that the constant is 100,000 because we said, oh man, this wasn't correct with the 1, right? It wasn't correct like this. So we needed to figure out like what the constant really was, right? And so we know how much Y we're going to get because we have this number and we have this number. You only solve for Y, like in math, right? This is just a math-based stuff, right? So you come out with 500Y is going to be taken out of Y, and you will add 100 to Y. Just using the most simple math ever, right? In this particular case, we dropped the price 75%. And now the new price at where it is now, after someone came in and doubled the supply of X, the price went from 10 to 2.5 per Y. So see how much that price dropped? 75%. You took 500 out and you added 100. Because that was in a big ratio compared to how much liquidity was there, right? So for those who care about math, what number of tokens will the price be 1-to-1? Like when you put in one token, you get one token out. The answer is when X equals Y. And so for X times Y equals 100,000. So X squared, so it's basically 100,000 squared, you'll get 3.16. So you would actually be able to know how much you can get to get the price to be equal to this. So, it's just ratios. Everything is ratios with math, right? With this kind of math. So, you're putting in an order that's pretty big compared to how much X is in there. So you're going to move the price. You're going to move the price because you're coming in with a pretty big order. Now, okay, so you can get a deeper understanding of how liquidity might change things, right? So what happens if someone comes in and drops a large amount of liquidity? This thing's too illiquid. I want this thing to have way more liquidity so that people don't move the price so much. So I had 10 times as much liquidity, right? And I keep the ratio of the tokens the same, right? So I had 900 tokens to X and I had 9,000 to Y, and now the ratio of tokens is the same. The price is the same, but I came in and I added way more liquidity, right? Right here, the add liquidity option. Added a huge amount of liquidity. Actually, I'm going to have 90% of the share of the pool because I grew the pool by 10x. So now I own 90% of the pool. And this is one of the ways you can make money from being a liquidity provider. But I'm actually going to get into that, how you can make money being a liquidity provider. And I'll get into, the scenarios where you can make money or where you can lose money. And so you can understand that as well. So the price would be 0.1, you'd get 10, so this is just showing you the price. This is just showing you Uniswap's interface and how we're relating this to the real world situation, right? So someone comes in as a huge amount of liquidity and we have the same price and we're going to put in the same order, the same exact order we put up there, but now we have way more liquidity. Well, we're still going to say, 1 times 1 is 1. We want some constant. And we know this doesn't make sense, so we know we need to multiply this. And remember, this is where we added liquidity, right? We added 10x to liquidity, but notice that the 10x becomes 2 zeros instead of 1, right? So we got 2 more zeros in our constant. So now we got 2 more zeros in our constant, so we had a squared effect of liquidity action. So the amount of liquidity you act is proportional squared, right? So however much liquidity someone adds, they're adding it's an exponential function. They're making it exponentially more hard to move the price when you add a liquidity. So, you increase the liquidity by 10x, but in reality, that constant was increased by a square. So we come in with the same order. We're going from 1,000, and now we're going to have 1,100, right? Our last order was 100. We're going to do the same 100 order. We're going to do the same 100 order and we want to know how much Y we're going to get. So we have the constant now figured out because we know that something multiplied this equals a constant, and it doesn't make sense for 1. So we have something that we have to multiply it by, and we get our constant. So we now know how much Y we're going to get because we have our X, how much X, we're supplying it with 100X, leaving Y with a constant that we figured out, and we know how much Y we're going to get. So now, it still moved the price a significant amount, but it moved it way less. Like we end up, in this particular case, we dropped the price only 17%. Now the ratio is, after this order, is 1 of X equals 8.26 instead of where up here it became 2.5 after 100 order X. This one it moved the price much less. So that's what that should give you an idea of what liquidity is. Liquidity makes price more sticky. It's people pooling their money in order so people can make these values, and it's tied to a curve. And when someone changes the liquidity, they change the constant. that these two multipliers are equal to. So they move this curve, this way or this way. But, I'm not going to get too much into the math. I'm not going to get into the math. I said I wouldn't. I can go deep in the math, guys. I know a lot about, I like math. I grew up in a mathematics family. But I'm trying to make it as math light as possible, something that is highly dependent on math. Okay, but that should give you an example of liquidity. All right, so now for those who want to know, well, maybe I could take advantage of this. How can I become a liquidity pool provider and make some money from this, right? This is DeFi. This is how some people are making money. So there's something called impermanent loss. So we're going to go through a bearish scenario and a bullish scenario. So, all of these are in comparison to if you just held, if you did nothing. And you had a token pair of 1-to-1. So let's say I had some value of token 1 and some value of token 2, and we create the sum of them as 2, right? And this is just to show an example of how this works, right? So one of the interesting things is impermanent loss protects you on the downside, but it also hurts you in the upside. So if you just held and one of your tokens goes down 50%, you would have 1.5. You'd lose 25%. If you were a liquidity provider, it absorbs some of that action because it's an averaged out performance. So if the token went down 50%, right? One of your tokens went down 50%, you would only be hitting a 5% loss. Because it protects you. It's a mathematical curve right here, right? Because the price action shifts a lot more slowly, right? So if you just held, you lost 25% between holding these tokens without them being a liquidity provider. But if you were a liquidity provider, you'd be protected 5%. You'd lose 5% comparatively. So that's much better. And if it went down 75%, you would only lose, you would lose 62% of your total, right? If one of your tokens went down 75% and the other one was 1, so you'd have 1.25, right? Like one of them went down 75%, one of them stayed the same, you would have 1.25, so you'd lose 62%. But in the liquidity provider, you'd only lose 20%. Now, when this protection does stop at around the 50% mark, and then because then you would literally be left you have 1, right? And this one goes to 0. Well, you'd just be left with 1. But in this case, it would actually, it starts dropping off rapidly at the end because, it keeps pulling down you closer to 0, right? So 0 times 0 is 0. So it's at some point this protection stops, and this becomes worse because, I think it's after, after the 75%, you can see that this curve gets exponential. But, so yeah, if you think one of the tokens is going to be worth 0, don't ever become a liquidity provider because you'll lose everything. Not only the thing that you think might go to 0, but the other side, you'll lose it. All right, and so now let's go to the bullish scenario. So let's say that your token doubles in price, one of them. Well, you'd have 3 left over. In this case, being a liquidity provider, you'd be down 5%. You'd have 2.85. So you'd lost 5%. That's your impermanent loss. So it would have been better just to held. In the case where it's bearish, it's better to be a liquidity provider. In the bullish case, it's better to just hold, especially with big price movements. And so if you see that the price goes up by 4, you would have had 5, but now you lost 20% of what you would have had, right? Because one of them would be 4, one would be 1, and you get a sum of 5, right? So you'd be 20% down. Okay, so we're going to look at how you can make money. How can you really understand all this? So let's say what Uniswap does is it gives you an APY. It'll show you the volume, whatever the volume is, the volume divided by the liquidity, right? So here's a tip for you, and I've noticed this exists roughly to be the case. If the volume and the liquid equals the liquidity, that's 100% APY. If you notice that the volume divided by the liquidity equals 1, now if the volume if the volume divided by the liquidity equals 0.5, that means that's roughly a 50% APY. If the volume divided by the liquidity is equal to 10%, that's roughly a 10% APY. I've noticed that it has roughly that correlation. So when we want to be a liquidity provider is when we think that the APY is bigger than the impermanent loss, right? So if you get an APY of 12% and you say, oh, like the token might double in value. Like, so this is a year later, we have an APY volume, right? So the volume to liquidity equals 0.12, right? Which is roughly 12% APY, right? And we say, oh, like we're gonna have an impermanent loss of 5%. We're gonna come out with a profit because so if the token doubles, it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna 12% subtract 5%. You know, you get 7% APY. So that's good. You know, walk away with a profit. But if you think that but if the token goes up a lot, you'd potentially lost 20% of what you would have had. So you'd come up with an 8% loss. So you want to be a liquidity provider if you're not super bullish. Like if you think if you got these two tokens, you want them to roughly stay about the same price. But with a lot of volume, with a volume to liquidity ratio that's pretty high. Or that's just good, right? But you want them to, you're looking for that volume, that activity to beat the price action. So, if you're bearish, you might want to be a liquidity provider, or if you think that it's not going to go super high, like one of your tokens, like you have token X and you have token Y. If you think one of these is going to outperform the other by a lot, you're better off just holding it. Because unless the APY is super high, unless the APY is higher than the impermanent loss. Okay, so that's how you know whether or not being a liquidity provider is profitable. So you will need to dive in the math if you want to understand. It's like finance. This stuff is finance. So if you want to make money from it, you got to know the numbers. You got to know some of this math. But guys, that is a basic summary of all this. I tried to keep it as math low as possible but this is all based on math, all these concepts, and that's how we can establish all this stuff. It's code, and the code represents these ratios, and the code controls all these things, and that's how all these things can be created. And that's how we can have order books without, that's how we can have trading without order books, etc. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of content. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I look forward to bringing high quality content to you guys in the future.